My name is Victoria Reed, and I learned the real price of love on a bitter Tuesday morning in Cleveland, Ohio. The sky hung low and gray, the kind of color that made the streets look washed out. I had flown from Boston the night before, carrying a tote bag and a foolish bit of hope that maybe, just maybe, my parents' divorce hadn't erased everything good we once shared. They were living in a rented ranch house in Parma, a quiet street with trimmed hedges and mailboxes painted white. I'd been paying that rent for 2 years, $2,600 each month, plus utilities. Every first of the month, I also sent them $5,000 to cover food, medicine, and whatever else they needed. It wasn't charity, it was love, or at least I thought so. When I pulled up to the house, I noticed the blinds were half drawn. A faint glow came from the kitchen window. I took a deep breath, straightened my coat, and knocked. I could hear voices inside, muffled but sharp. Then the door creaked open just a few inches. My mother's eyes met mine, distant and cautious. My father stood behind her, jaw clenched. "Why are you here?" he asked. His voice was cold, the kind that cut clean through the air. "We don't need you anymore. Leave." At first, I thought I misheard him. "What?" "You heard me," he snapped. "We're fine. Go back to your life in Boston." The door began to close. I reached out, palm against the frame, heart racing. "I just came to check on you," I said softly, "to make sure you're both okay." His hand tightened on the knob. "Take your drama somewhere else." The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. I stood there, staring at the peeling paint on the porch, feeling something inside me go still. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The cold air stung my face, but the ache in my chest was worse. I had given them everything, my savings, my time, my effort, and somehow, I was still not enough. I walked back to my rental car, the world blurring around me. I sat there in silence, staring at the small house I'd kept afloat for years. That was when it hit me. I hadn't been a daughter to them for a long time. I had been a provider, a lifeline, a wallet. At the airport later that afternoon, I opened my phone and scrolled through my banking app. My thumb hovered over the auto-pay options that had kept their lives running. The rent, the monthly transfer, the automatic grocery orders. I took a breath and canceled every one of them. The confirmation emails arrived one by one, short and impersonal. But each click felt like lifting a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying. When I boarded the flight back to Boston, I felt hollow but clear. I spent the entire flight staring at the seat in front of me, thinking about how I'd spent years buying my place in their lives. They had rejected me anyway. Somewhere over New York, I decided I was done. I opened the small notebook I always carried in my purse and wrote down 4 short sentences, one beneath the other. 1. Close the faucet. 2. Build the boundary. 3. Buy my own house. 4. Learn to forgive myself if not them. I stared at those words until they blurred. They didn't feel like revenge. They felt like rescue. For once, I wasn't trying to fix anyone else's mess. I was trying to start my own life. When I landed in Boston, the city lights glowed like fireflies through the fog. I took a cab to my apartment in Back Bay, a 2-bedroom condo I'd bought the previous year for $640,000. It was the one space that belonged entirely to me, paid for with my own late nights and sacrifices. I dropped my bag by the door and stood there, still wearing my coat, realizing how quiet peace could sound when it wasn't forced. I made tea and sat at the kitchen counter, my phone buzzing endlessly. Missed calls, messages from my mother, a few from my brother Evan, who usually only texted when he needed something. I didn't open them. I stared out the window at the rain sliding down the glass and said out loud, to no one but myself, no more. The next morning, I woke up to the first quiet Saturday I'd had in years. No bills to pay for anyone else. No list of errands that weren't mine. I walked to the Charles River with a coffee in hand and watched the water move, slow, steady, unstoppable. It reminded me that I could move too. By the end of that week, I'd taken a photo of the napkin where I'd rewritten my 4 goals and taped it to my refrigerator door. It became my promise to myself. That day on the porch in Parma had broken something, but it had also set something free. I wasn't the daughter who fixed everything anymore. I was the woman who finally decided she didn't need permission to start over. That was the day my life stopped revolving around their house and started being built around mine. A week after I'd shut the financial faucet, my phone rang just as I was walking along the Charles River. The morning air in Boston was sharp and cold, but it smelled clean, like the start of something new. I didn't check the caller ID. I didn't have to. "What did you do?" My father's voice thundered through the speaker. "Rent is due. You didn't send the money." I stopped walking. "You told me you didn't need me," I said calmly. "I believed you." There was a pause, then my mother's voice took over, tighter, sharper. "Don't be childish, Victoria. We counted on you." "I counted on you, too," I said, and hung up. They called again at noon. Then again at 5. My brother Evan sent a text that said I was cruel. My sister Paige messaged that Mom hadn't stopped crying. But every word, every accusation, carried the same heartbeat. It wasn't love, it was money.
Not "how are you? Can we talk? Just why didn't you pay?"
For the first time in my life, I ignored them all. That night, I came home to my condo in Back Bay and sat at the kitchen counter with a glass of water that tasted like silence. The condo had once felt like my greatest achievement, a 2-bedroom space I bought for $640,000 after years of saving and grinding through corporate life. But that evening, it felt like an empty museum of someone else's sacrifices. I made tea and stared at the steam, wondering if guilt ever stopped burning. The next morning, the landlord from Cleveland emailed all 3 of us. His message was polite but firm. The rent for my parents' place was due, and since I had always been the one paying, he wanted to confirm whether the account had changed. I replied with one line: "I won't be covering future payments. Please communicate with them directly." He wrote back, "Understood." It was the first time anyone had understood me in months. Still, holding the line wasn't easy. I sat on the floor that night, back against the cabinets, knees pulled to my chest. I cried, not because they were struggling, but because I had been the one keeping them from facing reality for so long. When you stop being someone's safety net, you realize how much of your own life you've spent beneath them. I turned on my laptop and searched houses in Maine, somewhere near the water. I'd always dreamed of a small coastal place, maybe in South Portland, quiet and self-owned. I found one listing that caught my eye, a cedar-shingled cape with a navy blue door and a patch of ocean visible through the trees. The price, $495,000, was daunting but doable. I closed the tab, then opened it again. At work that week, I threw myself into numbers. Spreadsheets don't shout. Formulas don't guilt you. I managed quarterly budgets, led calls, and smiled in meetings. But during every break, I found myself cleaning up the wreckage my old generosity had left behind. The first mess was a car I'd bought for my father 2 years earlier when his old truck died. The title was in my name because he couldn't qualify for financing. I called the dealer and arranged to sell it back. The second was a credit card I'd given my mother for groceries only. The balance was over $3,200. I canceled it that day and paid the remainder myself. The math hurt, but clarity was worth more than comfort. By Friday, the landlord emailed again, still no rent. He said he'd be forced to send a 7-day notice. I thanked him for keeping me informed, confirmed once more that I wouldn't step in, and closed the email. That evening, my phone rang from an unknown number. I answered, already knowing. "Why would you do this?" my father said. His voice was worn, but the anger was still there. "We raised you. We gave you everything." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell him about the years I'd worked 3 jobs, the student loans I'd paid off without help, the nights I wired them money I couldn't spare. But I didn't say any of that. "I love you," I said quietly, "but I won't pay anymore." My mother's breath caught. My father muttered something about betrayal. Then the line went dead. I stood by the window, staring down at the glowing city. Boylston Street was alive below me. People walking fast, cabs rushing by, a busker's guitar echoing off glass buildings. The world didn't stop just because my family was angry. It kept turning.
So could I.
That night, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the small dining table, the same one I'd bought used for $120 when I first moved to Boston. I spread out my financial documents, bank statements, investments, a folder labeled Future. It felt like sorting through someone else's life, someone who had spent years paying for affection that never really existed. I wrote a new note and taped it next to the list on my fridge. It said, "Freedom costs what peace is worth." That weekend, I went for another walk along the Charles. The trees had begun to yellow, and the wind carried the smell of damp leaves. I thought about my parents, my brother, my sister, each one depending on me until it became a reflex. But I also thought about the house with the navy door, the quiet mornings by the coast, the version of myself who wouldn't have to beg to be loved. That version didn't live in Cleveland anymore. She lived here in Boston, starting to breathe again. When my phone buzzed that night, I didn't look. I turned it face down and let it vibrate against the table until it stopped. Then I smiled, not out of spite, but relief. Boston kept moving.
So did I.
2 months after I stopped sending money home, I stood in a quiet closing room in South Portland, Maine, signing papers that would change the shape of my life. The room smelled faintly of coffee and ink. The realtor slid the last document toward me with a polite smile, and my hand trembled only slightly as I wrote my name for the final time. With that signature, the small cedar-shingled cape with the navy blue door officially became mine. The cashier's check I handed over, $130,000 for the down payment and closing costs, felt like both a wound and a healing. It was a large piece of the savings I had built over 10 years of working late nights and early mornings in Boston, climbing the corporate ladder one spreadsheet at a time. But it was also the first money I had ever spent entirely on myself. Before the closing, I had been seeing a therapist, Dr. Helen Ward, in Cambridge. Her sessions were $160 each, and I used to think that was an indulgence. Now I saw them as a survival. She had taught me one line that changed how I viewed everything. Boundaries are not punishments. They are doors you keep the keys to. When the realtor placed the keys in my hand, I knew I was finally turning one of those doors. For once, it opened toward me. The house was small but perfect. 2 bedrooms upstairs, each with a window that framed the sky. A narrow staircase that groaned like an old friend. A kitchen with a window above the sink that looked out toward the water. And a gravel driveway that would be a nightmare when February snow rolled in, but I didn't care. That first weekend, I painted the navy door again, just to make it look new. Then I hung a willow wreath I'd found for $18 at a small shop on Commercial Street. When I stepped back to look at it, sunlight spilled across the porch, and for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. At night, I worked on a project that had quietly grown out of my old logistics job. I called it North Harbor Systems, a small software company that helped regional retailers track shipments in real time without expensive upgrades. It started as a side idea on my laptop after work, but it slowly turned into something real. By the time I moved into the Cape, I had already signed my first major client, a Boston-based retailer who agreed to a 1-year contract worth $210,000. When the first payment hit my business account, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the numbers, realizing that my life was finally being built by my own hands. I hired a developer, Mia Hayes, from Providence, and a part-time bookkeeper named Thomas Reed. No relation, though we laughed about it every time we talked. Mia worked remotely, sending code updates late at night, her messages always punctuated with cheerful emojis. Thomas kept the books balanced, and my panic at bay. A week after that first payment cleared, a letter arrived at my new address in Maine. It was forwarded from my Boston apartment, written in my mother's delicate, looping handwriting. Inside was a copy of an eviction notice from months earlier and a short message. "I didn't know this was your address. Please help us. We're staying near the lake now. We will be better. We promise." I stared at the paper for a long time. The woman I used to be would have opened her laptop immediately, checking balances, finding solutions. But the woman I was becoming took her coat and walked down to the shoreline instead. The air smelled like salt and pine. I watched a gull tug at seaweed in the sand and thought about all the ways I had used money to buy peace that never lasted. When I came home, I made tea and set the letter on the table. I didn't tear it, didn't reply, didn't even move it for 2 days. Finally, I made a quiet decision. I donated $5,000 to the shelter listed in the letter, specifying it was for meals and beds. I left my name off the record. I didn't call. I didn't reopen the wound. That evening, I cooked a simple dinner, grilled salmon and roasted vegetables, and ate at the kitchen counter with the sound of rain tapping on the windows. The peace in that small house was different. It wasn't silence forced by fear or guilt. It was calm built by choice. Still, I needed something more, something to keep me moving forward. I started looking at small properties in Rhode Island and southern Massachusetts. One afternoon, I drove to Providence to see a narrow duplex on a tree-lined street near a hospital. It was modest but solid, 2 apartments, each occupied, one by a nurse, the other by a graduate student. The price tag was steep at $710,000, but the math worked. The business was growing, my income was stable, and I wanted my money to work for me, not disappear into people who saw me only as their safety net. So I bought it. Mia helped me draft a warm, practical welcome packet for the tenants, rent details, maintenance info, and even a list of nearby clinics and food banks. "You're thoughtful," she said. "Most landlords wouldn't care about this stuff." "I used to know what it's like to need help and not know where to find it," I replied. Back in Maine, my little house began to take on the rhythm of home. Mornings smelled like coffee and ocean air. Evenings smelled like soap and salt. I learned which step on the staircase creaked and which window let in the softest light. On a shelf in the living room, I placed my grandfather's old carpenter's level, the one tool he'd given me when I left Ohio years ago. He had told me, keep things plumb and true. I wasn't sure if I'd done that in life, so far. But standing there in a home I bought with my own money, built on choices I finally owned, I felt closer than ever. By late summer, life in Maine had found its rhythm, mornings of ocean mist curling through the pines, evenings quiet enough to hear the wind cross the porch. Then came the email that changed everything. A logistics firm in Cleveland wanted to partner with North Harbor Systems. I hesitated before replying.
Cleveland.
The word alone still carried a heaviness I'd tried to outgrow. But business was business, and this was an opportunity worth taking. The meeting was productive. The team loved our platform, and I secured a deal that would expand our operations into the Midwest. Still, as I walked out of the warehouse, I couldn't stop thinking about the city that used to be home. On impulse, I drove toward the community center listed in my mother's old letter, the same one she'd written for months ago, begging for help. I didn't know what I was hoping to find. Closure, maybe, or courage. Inside, a kind-eyed counselor named Angela greeted me at the desk. "You must be Victoria," she said softly, as though she already knew the weight I was carrying. "They're here. Do you want a private room?" My throat tightened. "Yes, please." The small conference room smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet. When my parents walked in, they looked smaller than I remembered. My mother's hair had grayed at the roots, and her eyes, once sharp and commanding, seemed dulled. My father's shoulders were slumped. The arrogance that used to fill the room had burned away. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize them. My mother spoke first. "We were wrong, Victoria," she said, voice trembling. "We said things we didn't mean. We were scared. We need help." My father didn't look up. His hands were clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. "We need money," he said flatly. There it was, the word that had built and broken everything between us. I let the silence stretch until I could breathe through it. "I came here because I wanted to see you," I said. "But I can't give you money. I can, however, give you tools to help yourselves." I pulled a folder from my bag and placed it on the table. Inside was a list of resources, a 6-week financial literacy program, counseling vouchers from Angela's department, and a certificate I'd prepaid for 1 month of rent at a transitional apartment complex nearby. Each paper represented something I'd thought through carefully, each one designed to help without reopening the old wound. My father glanced at the papers, his jaw tightening. "So, no money?"
No, I said.
Not for me. I won't be your provider anymore. My mother's eyes filled. Do you at least forgive us? I took a long breath. Forgiveness. It was such a loaded word, one people often used when what they really meant was forget. Forget the pain, the betrayal, the years of emotional debt. But forgiveness, I had learned, wasn't about pretending nothing happened. It was about choosing not to carry it like armor. I forgive you enough to stop punishing you in my mind, I said. But I won't put myself back where I was. I can't. My mother began to cry quietly. My father stayed silent. The papers between us might as well have been a wall, but for once, it was a wall that kept me safe. Angela came in then, placing a tray of water on the table. You've all done something brave today, she said gently. We set dates for their classes, and they both signed forms for the program. I thanked her, then stood to leave. When I reached the door, my mother whispered, "We'll try, Victoria." "I hope you do," I said and walked out. That evening, on the flight back to Portland, I stared out the window as the clouds drifted below. The map on the screen showed our path crossing from Ohio to New England, and I thought about how many families across this country were trying to sew themselves back together with thread too thin to hold. Some succeeded. Others didn't. But I was learning that survival sometimes meant walking away without slamming the door. When the taxi turned down my street later that night, the smell of salt water filled the air. My little Navy Door house stood waiting, bathed in the last gold light of sunset. I carried my suitcase inside and set it down on the rug I'd bought at a thrift shop for $22. The quiet welcomed me like an old friend. In the kitchen, I made tea and looked at the list I'd taped to the fridge months ago. Keep the faucet closed. Keep the boundary. Keep the house. Keep my heart open to the future. I smiled and added a fifth line beneath it. Keep peace even when no one else understands it. I sat by the window with my tea as twilight deepened. Outside, a neighbor walked his dog past the picket fence, and a child in a red coat chased a drifting leaf. The world, indifferent and beautiful, kept moving. My phone buzzed once, a text from Angela. They came to the first class today. That was all it said. No details. No pleas. Just a small fact that felt like a closing chapter. I leaned back in my chair and looked around my home. The soft gray walls, the scent of sea air, the light catching on the rim of my cup. I wasn't the daughter who fixed everyone's problems anymore. I was a woman who had learned that love without limits can destroy the giver. I don't know what my parents will do next, or if they'll finish the program, or if they'll ever understand what their choices cost. But I know this. I will never again pay for peace with pieces of myself. Respect is not earned through money or pity. It's built through truth, and I finally own mine. I keep that truth close now, like the key that opens my navy blue door, the door to the home I chose, the life I built, and the quiet that is truly mine.